became a fully fledged detective after it was January 2000. So, what's that? About eight and a bit years, and got posted to Peckham in South London, famous for Only Fools and Horses. And that was a real change for me, because I policed the area I grew up in, and I'm a white guy, and I grew up in a very predominantly white area, and I was suddenly working in an area with a lot more ethnically diverse. So my frame of reference was suddenly gone, and I did five. It was quite a difficult shift, actually, and it's why I think I'm a strong believer that the police should reflect the society it polices, down to, so for instance, where I policed an area where it was predominantly white, where I grew up, I could spot a criminal a mile off. But then when I went to a more ethnically diverse area, my frame of reference was suddenly gone, and it was much more difficult for me. And so I can see where the clashes come, where young black men feel they're being harassed, because I I I I admit I harassed the hell out of criminals in the area where I policed, because I knew them, and I knew the criminals, but I wouldn't harass normal people on their way to school or going to work or whatever, and I could easily differentiate between them. But that's much harder for me if I'm a white guy coming from a white area that I've always lived and grew up in police, and then I'm working in a black area. Where is my frame of reference between that young black guy that's going to school, or the young black guy that's out to commit burglaries? It's much harder for me. So I can see how you can end up in a situation where the young black guy that's going to school feels harassed because he's being stopped by the police, and those police that are stopping him are almost certainly white, almost certainly grew up in an area miles and miles away from this, and that they're doing it in a way that they feel that they're doing the right thing. And I'd never criticise police who feel they're doing the right thing. They're not harassing him because he's black. They're out trying to stop criminals, but they're doing it in a way where it's more scattergun, because they haven't got that frame of reference. They don't know. They're not looking for the right people. They're just looking. Well, they're looking for the right people, but they're not looking in the right places. So, yeah, and I can see where stop and search in London and other areas where it's ethnically diverse can cause problems, and I think it stems from the fact that the police officers that are using those powers can't easily differentiate between the wrong uns and the right uns, if that makes sense.
How did you combat that then? Did you spend more time getting to know them? Did you have a little rapport with them? How did you work through that?
I think I definitely 100% cut down on the amount of stop and search I did, because I wasn't as comfortable doing it. Although also as well, I was a detective by then, so naturally you would do less anyway. But so if I ended up as a detective on their crime squad, so I did the same sort of work I was doing in Greenwich. Night duties, when I was night duty CID, I would patrol trying to look for criminals, but I definitely 100% found it more difficult. And so I would stop and speak to people, but I think I would be less inclined to search them, but I'd still stop and speak to them, but I'd be less inclined to search them, because I'd be struggling in my mind. Am I on the right lines? Is this really criminal? Or so? Yeah, I found it much more difficult. I was much more comfortable, and I think much more effective in the area that I grew up in.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that before.
Yeah, I mean, if you step away and think about it, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Police officer. I never ever worked with a police officer that ever said, we're stopping this with this man because he's black. And if I did, I wouldn't want to work with them, because that's just absolutely wrong. But I can understand why, if you're on the receiving end of these stop and search, why you think, well, I'm not committing any sort of crime, I'm being stopped. It's because I'm black, isn't it? And I don't think it is, and I never saw that. But indirectly it is, because the white officer that's stopping you is doing it in a way that's less targeted. And it's a bit, like I say, a bit more scattergun, because they're trying to do the right thing, and they know that. And let's not get away from the fact that in these areas, Peckham, etc., it's going to be young black men that mostly are committing crimes like robberies, most of the stabbings and shootings, etc. So the police are trying to do the right thing, but their frame of reference is off, and they're doing it in a way that's why it needs to be. There is no easy answer. Dawn, I really wish there was an easy answer, and but there isn't one. It needs, yeah, it needs work because it's clearly not working properly at the moment. But that's the root cause of it for me, and how you put that right. Well, as I say, one of the things that I think is that if the police properly reflected the communities that they policed, that would be easier. But we've got barriers to get over there as well.
So you mentioned there you did patrol, and that was when you arrested people. Can I ask you to tell me what you said when you arrested them? What was your American thing?
It all depends on the circumstance. I mean, sometimes, let's just say, for instance, you stop someone and let's just say they have a traffic warrant. And you just tell them, say, hey, listen, step out of the car, do me a favor, put your hands behind your back. And, you put the cuffs on them, and then, most people will say, well, why are you arresting me? And you just explain to them, you have this situation that you haven't taken care of. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to take you in, and, you can get this squared away and get it finally taken care of. And then there's other people where you don't even get a chance to explain. You can just end up, it goes from 0 to 100 real quick, and you're putting cuffs on them. I mean, there was situations I had where literally me and my partner pull up. I believe it was a noise complaint. There were two guys sitting outside. Before we can even get out of the car, they just charged us. For no reason, they just charged at us, and we're fighting with them. And, in that situation, you're not going to explain to someone you're under arrest. They're going to know they're under arrest at that point, So it all just depends on the circumstances. But most of the times, you just tell people, hey, listen, unfortunately, I got to take you in for whatever. And it all goes back to how you treat people and how you talk to people. And that's how you can determine what kind of response you're going to get. Because 9 times out of 10, you're dealing with people at their worst. And if you go in with the mentality that I'm the police, you're going to do what I say or else, you're going to have a long day on your hands. But if you talk to people like they are human and show them respect, it usually goes. And that's not always the case. I mean, you're just going to have some people that are just a-holes. And we dealt with a lot of those people, but if you treat people with respect, most people go along with the program and you usually don't have any problems.
And when you were out in patrol, do you always do that in pairs, or are you by yourself, and is it in a car, or are you walking? How's patrol for you?
When I worked patrol, the way our department was set up, we had teams, usually teams of 4 or 5 people. And that was made up of a sergeant. You would have 4 or 5 patrol officers, but one of those officers would be what was called a specialist or evidence tech. Each team had an evidence tech. So you would have, like I said, 4 to 5 people on each team. So for me, I will always work patrol. And in that team, there was usually one car that rode double, so it was 2 people in a car, and then there was usually the others were singles. And the reason why they did that is because the double cars would be the ones responsible for, the warrant pickups from other jurisdictions. They would handle the really hot runs, like if you get an alarm, a burglar alarm or something like that, they would handle those type runs if nobody else is available. The single cars were usually responsible for traffic accidents, taking reports and things like that. But, throughout the night, if it's depending on how busy you are, you did a little bit of everything. So it really didn't matter if you were double or single. If you got sent to a run and you were single that required, more than one officer, then they would send another single with you.
So when you were out doing the street, what did you carry with you? What was your equipment? What did you take with you?
So I always feel like I'm so old when I start talking about what was going on in 1991, because I'm conscious that many of the people I speak to weren't even born then. So we didn't have, so all I had as our personal protective equipment was a piece of wood. We had a truncheon. It was like a piece of wood that would fit inside. We had a special truncheon pocket in your trousers that you would put your truncheon into, and handcuffs. And not like now we've got like the rigid handcuffs. Back then they were the linked handcuffs. So that was all we had. We didn't have CS spray. Certainly didn't have taser. Obviously firearms, they were only limited police officer firearms. So protection wise, we didn't have vests. There were no stab vests. So protection wise, we had a lot less. But if I'm honest, I never felt uncomfortable or scared or threatened. In my 30 years, I got assaulted once, and that was very early on. It was the 13th of February. I remember it was the 13th of February going into the 14th of February, because we called it the Valentine's Day Massacre. In what year would it have been? 93. And we got called to a party. My colleague and I went down there. We were in a van, and it was a reception, an engagement party, and they were all fighting. And my best weapon I ever had in police was my mouth, the words I used, the way I spoke to people. And we got there, a colleague and I, we calmed it all down. We were getting them to go away. And this would have been, I think it was a Friday night, or it might have been a Saturday night. And we had what was called the rowdy van. And it would be so we were night duty, and 6 officers from the late turn that finished at 10 o'clock would man the rowdy van. And the rowdy van was there to go around the pubs, make sure the licenses were being followed. And then when turning out time come, there was a bit of extra support in case there were fights and stuff. Now, what happens, what I've noticed in my time in the police, is when police officers are in pairs, they act very different. They can act very differently when they're suddenly grouped in a load of them. And it's like, I suppose it's the same with it's like the criminals were the same. On their own, it'd be nice. Put them in a group, they would suddenly become brave. And I think this happens as well. It can happen in the police. And these 6, and one in particular, rather than doing what they probably would have done if they were on their own and come out and do what we did and calm it down, decided, oh, there's a load of us, we're going to come out and we're going to wind it back up again. So I ended up getting a kick in. The same people that were being nice to me, I was having a good rapport with, suddenly I was part of this gang that were coming on them, and they all turned on us, and I got a proper kick in. I turned up with 2 black eyes back home, and that was the only time in my career. And I arrested so many people for every offence you could think of, like going up to terrorism and many, many murderers. And I never got assaulted, never got into fights, not properly. And it's because I knew how to talk to people. So even though back then I didn't have all that protection and taser and all that stuff, that I felt that I was comfortable without it, and certainly wouldn't want to be armed. I think that would have shifted the attitude and the relationship between me and the people I was dealing with drastically. I wouldn't have liked that.
And what do you carry with you? Because obviously in the UK, I know they've got truncheons and sprays. What's the difference? What do you have in America?
Well, it's funny. When I started, all we had was a gun, handcuffs, a baton, and a flashlight. As by the time I retired, I think we had guns, tasers, flashlights, pepper spray. They had so much junk. It was
weighing you down.
Yeah. Yeah. And now, a lot of the guys, they don't even wear the gun belt anymore. They wear a vest that carries it, because the gun belt takes a toll on your back. And now guys wear a vest where everything is loaded on the front, so it doesn't carry, hinders your back as much. But back then, like I said, I tried to carry as little stuff as possible. Just because of that reason. It was just very hard on your back. And for me, I always just carried my gun. I had to carry a baton or my taser once we were assigned those, pepper spray, baton, flashlight, handcuffs, rubber gloves. Always had a little pouch that had a respiratory mask over in case you had to give someone CPR or something like that. Then inside the vehicle itself, I would carry my shotgun in the car with me. In the trunk, I would have my M16. Um, then there's other stuff like first aid equipment and things like that that's in the car with you. And you have your duty bag that contained all your report forms and your clipboard, your ticket book, and things like that.
God. It's like a proper office going on there in the car, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much it. That's what it is. It's your mobile office for the day. That's pretty much what it is.
Things have slightly changed now. When I started out in the CID, I was a PC in the CID, and we had to put together a body of work to show that you could deal with prisoners, deal with case reports to the Crown Prosecution Service, take cases to court, etc. And once you'd passed this, you put it together in like a storyboard. You become what was known as a TI, a trainee investigator. They don't have these anymore. The TIs, as I was, would now be called a TDC, which is a trainee detective constable. And you did that for a very short time. And then what I had to do was go onto a board, like a panel, an interview panel. And once you passed that, you became a DC. You become a detective constable. Slightly changed now. The TDCs you could be a TDC for 6 months, 2 years or something. Then you have to go and you have to pass an exam first. Then you have to pass a course. I don't know. I've done it, but you have to go. And you can't become a detective properly. Call yourself a detective until you've gone through a load of more steps. What I liked about I did is once you've done the interview board, you came out and you've either passed or failed, and you're a detective at the end of it. I like that. So I did about 18 months, I would say, as a PC and TI and CID, and then to become a detective and got posted to Peckham. And started dealing with sort of their major crime in Peckham. And I did that for 2 years. And you rotate around. So I did burglary squad for a while, the main office. The main office back then, you would deal with things like serious sexual assaults like rapes. You would deal with GBHs and fraud. We dealt with fraud back then. I'm not sure if that's the same now, but it was those types of crimes. But they had a robbery squad that would deal with robberies, burglary squad that deal with those. You had a domestic violence unit or a community safety unit who would deal with domestic violence. So with very specific crimes that you dealt with. So I did that for 2 years at Peckham. And then what happened back then is every Friday you would have like what we'd call it, like it's not quite a magazine, like a booklet type thing would come out with, and it was called the notices. And in the notices, you'd have things like where people had moved to, or transferred to, people who died, people who'd been disciplined, but it'd also have the jobs that were coming out, what vacancies were available. And it came out one Friday, and it said anti-terrorist branch. I thought, that sounds interesting, dealing with terrorists. I mean, I had no idea what they did. I thought I'll put an application in because dealing with terrorists must be fun. And back then it was very different to how it is now. And it was quite a small unit. I think something like 70 detectives across 4 teams. And I put in for it. Didn't really expect to get it because it's really hard to get onto, and I got it, and I was quite surprised. And I went in without a clue as to what, because it's not the sort of you back then you couldn't even have an attachment. You couldn't go with them and say, "Can I work with you for a few weeks to see what you do?" Because everything's secret. So it's like, well, so you go into it, and it was very different to what I expected. It was very. In the police, you have two. We have 2 types of policing that we refer to: proactive and reactive. Now, I was quite proactive in the work I did. I was always looking for criminals to try and catch them. And reactive is more responding to the crimes after they've occurred. And the anti-terrorist branch was a lot more reactive than I thought. And the proactive work was done by special branch, who were it was separate back then. When I left, by the time I think shortly after I left, they joined. So rather than it was SO12 was special branch, SO13 was anti-terrorist branch. They joined together to become SO15. So, but when I did it, all the surveillance work and the building up cases against people in an intelligence form was done by a special branch. And then what we would do, we would come in and we would do the arrests, the searches, the interviews, all the hands-on stuff. And the people we were dealing with would never know these special branch people even existed. But I enjoyed it. I did it for 3 years before I got promoted and become a detective sergeant. So, and by the time I'd left, where we were 70 detectives when I joined, I think it's something like 1,500 by the time I left. It exploded hugely. Terrorism is a growth industry in the police. So, and I'm pleased I did it when I did, because it was a lot more. You were a lot more involved in everything. So virtually every time there's somebody being arrested, I was putting my hands up to interview them. So I interviewed a lot of terrorists, got involved in a lot of the arrests, the surveillance in terms, we weren't doing the surveillance ourselves, but we would be on the surveillance in terms of if somebody was arrested or they would call us forward. So we would be following the surveillance, but at a distance. So we would never have eyes on to the people that were being followed. So I got to do a lot of that, lots of good stuff. And I also got to, and the thing I was really pleased that I was able to be involved in was 7/7. So I left in something like September, October 2005. So I was there for the 7/7 bombings and had a huge role to play in that, because we were on call at the time. And when it came in, we were the first from SO13 to attend one of the bomb scenes. And once we got there, I never left for 2 weeks. We stayed there and we dealt with that crime scene, doing body recovery of all the evidence from the scene and everything. So I was really pleased that, not pleased that it happened, obviously, but pleased that if it was to happen, that I was there and could play a role in investigating it.
So you were there as a detective for a year. So what did you learn? I know you said it was the backside of it. So after you did the arrest and you saw that, what was it? What was it like?
Yeah, working as a detective, like I said, it was a lot of fun for me because I did get to see the backside of it. Trying to figure out. I personally worked commercial property crimes, meaning commercial break-ins, embezzlements, thefts at commercial businesses, things like that. That's what I primarily worked. And it was a lot of fun learning the different interview techniques of suspects, just talking to suspects and playing that whole mind game, that little cat and mouse game that you have to play with them, and learning the process, like I say, because when you're on the street, you get a run, you go to the run, you handle the run, which usually means you're taking a report or you're arresting somebody and you're writing a report. Then you go and you take your next run. When you're done at the end of the day, you're done. As a detective, it's not like that, because if I get assigned a case, I'm not getting assigned one case. I'm usually getting assigned a stack of cases each day.
Right.
So,
and you loved that, did you?
Well, for what I did, a lot of the cases were I was able to group them together, because usually when someone breaks into one office, they've broken into multiple office buildings. So a lot of the crimes, if I found a suspect that did a break-in in one area, then they were usually responsible for a number of break-ins. So I was able to close out reports that way. But a lot of the reports also, they went unsolved. So there was very little information to go off of. So they would end up just getting filed open. And then I had my cases that I really, if I had suspect information, I really had to work those. For what I did, a lot of times, especially like with break-ins, pawn shops, a lot of people at the time, they would pawn the things that they would steal out of office buildings. So I had a good connection or good relationship with a lot of the pawn shops in the area. And when they get things in that didn't quite feel right to them, they would call. And in Michigan, it's required that anytime jewelry is pawned or anything like that, that they have to send a copy of that pawn receipt to the local jurisdiction. So, you would go through those. If you had a break-in a house or something, or jewelry or something stole, and you could go through and see if it was pawned and things like that. but just getting access to the different databases that I had access to as a detective, to find the number of different cars that someone may have registered to them, the number of associates that they may hang out with, the people that they hang around. You know, one of my best and funnest cases as a detective, we had a young man who, I don't know what his deal was, but he enjoyed breaking into office buildings. And he would, well, it wasn't even just all, he did houses also, now that I think about it. But this guy, he kept a record. He literally kept file cabinets of the homes and the places that he had broken into. And I don't know why he did that, but what he was stealing wasn't necessarily physical property. He was looking for personal information. And he would take that information and he would go out and buy cars and other luxury items for himself with other people's names, put them in other people's names and things like that. Well, we chased this guy around, for my partner and I, for probably about almost 2 years before we finally caught up to him. And how we caught him was he had made his girlfriend angry.
Oh, yes. Oh, hell hath no fury.
And she lived in an apartment building where he kept all of the files of all of the places that he had broken into. And she calls us one day and says that, you know, he has all this stuff down in their storage unit. Do we want to come look at it? So we go down and we take a look at it. And as we're going through it, we find a order. He had put in an order for a new automobile that he was going to be picking up. And we set it up with the dealership that when he showed up, that we were going to arrest him. Unfortunately, he didn't show up that day. But he ended up getting caught later on. I think it was probably about 5 or 6 weeks later. The state police ended up, because we had put out a bulletin about him, and the state police somehow came into contact with him, and they ended up arresting him. And he ended up going there. He's probably still in jail. Yeah, but that was a fun case because, you know, like I said, we had access to his cell phone and his voicemails and all of that stuff. And, you know, that was the kind of stuff as a detective that you got to do that you didn't do on patrol. You know, all the secretive stuff, which was a lot of fun. It was like I said, that was the fun part of police work. It was like a cat and mouse game. And I think he knew we were looking for him. I mean, I'm sure he knew we were looking for him. And he got lucky, because now that I think about it, he broke into a house one day and there were 2 young boys in the house, and they heard him break the window and they ran upstairs to their parents' room. Well, their dad had a gun. And as the guy came upstairs, the oldest son pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. And the guy ended up running out. But that was the first time. That's how we found out who he was, or the first time we found out a little bit about him, because he had broken into another house earlier that day. And the vehicle that he was in was the same vehicle that he used to go to the house where the 2 young boys was at. And when he took off running, they looked out the window and they saw the vehicle. And my partner and I had a surveillance tape from or surveillance picture from a ATM where he had used a stolen ATM card, but we didn't know who he was or anything about it. We didn't, like I said, we didn't find out who he was until his girlfriend called.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Do you think she tipped him off? Is that why he didn't turn up that day, do you think? Do you think she had second thought?
I don't know why he didn't show up that day. I honestly don't. I don't know if she did or not, but it's possible. You know, she was pretty angry at him. So I don't know, maybe they made up and she told him. So I don't, I don't know what happened there, but he didn't show up.
And you mentioned a database. Do you have, I mean, in America, do you have a whole database that includes all the states?
Yeah, we have all of it. Local, state, national, and international.
Wow, okay. So it's all
and
connected.
Yeah. And, you know, through Interpol and, the term here is called LEAN, Law Enforcement Information Network, and that goes across the nation. So you can access a lot of information in it, and I can't even remember. There was other databases that we had access to, like the Secretary of State, a whole bunch of other different things that we had access to. I can't even think of off the top of my head.
That's a good job, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you say, it's all the sneaky stuff, the spy stuff. That's cool. And in that job, did you have to go to court and present the evidence or the information you'd collected?
Yes, I not as much so as I did when I was in patrol. Usually when I went to court, because once I was a detective, if I got a warrant for somebody, 9 times out of 10, they end up pleading guilty to it, so it never went to a trial or anything. But the most time that I would spend in court would be swearing to warrants. Like if I get a suspect and I have enough evidence to present the case to a prosecutor, if the prosecutor decides that there's enough information to write a warrant, then I'd have to go to court in front of the magistrate to swear to the warrant and tell them the evidence that I had and things like that. But that was most of the time. That's mostly what you do as a detective as far as court. And, you have to testify to other things. But most times, like I say, most people plead out anyway, so you never really go to trial or anything.
So then you leave for, was it 3 years you said?
Yeah, I was about 2 years, yeah.
So then the chief came back again and said, would you like to come back again? What role was that?
Yeah, when I left, like I say, my wife and I, we started a janitorial business, and we did that for about 2 years. And the chief calls me one day and asked if I wanted to come back to work. So when I went back, I ended up going back to patrol. So I went back to patrol, and that's where I spent the rest of my career working in patrol, pretty much up until the last 5 years. I was still in patrol, but I was doing something else. I was working the front desk, and that's a whole nother story, which we can get into.
Yeah, I love that story, though. I loved your last day story. That was really stuck with me. But what about the hostage negotiation? When did you do that?
Yeah, I became a hostage negotiator. I believe it was 2006 or 2007, something like that.
When you were doing interviews with a terrorist, you had a lovely rapport with them. You were like talking about football. You were just off, and then you switched. See that? I was trying to imagine you switching to being serious, sensible, no nonsense. And can you do it?
Yeah. So terrorists don't talk to you in interview. They don't even answer their name. So when you're interviewing someone, the first thing you do is you get people to introduce themselves. And a big part of that is anybody that's listening to it understands whose voice is who. So you start the interview and you'd say, I'm in the interview room. We used to do it at Paddington Green Police Station. I'm interviewing, can you state your full name, please? And there would just be silence. They wouldn't even say their name. So that's how difficult it was interviewing these people. But in between, because for normal offences, there's a maximum of 96 hours that police can keep you in custody, so 4 days. But for terrorism, it's 14 days, which is a long time to be in somebody's company with them every day, all day, every day. Not every day, because sometimes you would just leave them in their cells, you wouldn't get them out, but most days. So you would naturally build up a rapport with them. And what I'd learned over the years of being a detective is that it's much harder to go no comment and not speak to somebody if you like them than if you don't like them. I mean, you just think of yourself. If you don't like someone, you find it much easier to just ignore them, don't you? If someone was to send you a text message and you hated them, you go, "Oh, I'd ignore that." But if it's someone you really like, you'd feel inclined. I better respond. I have to reply. And that's no different to if you're interviewing someone. So I found that less so when you're dealing with more minor offences because you've got less time to do this, but you try and build up a rapport with someone. So little things like, for instance, when they're in the custody area, don't put them in the cell. Let the jailer put them in the cell. You get them out of the cell. So you're always rescuing them from that horrible place that they don't want to be. You're not putting them back. So little psychological things like that. when their dinner's coming and or if they want a cup of tea, you deliver the dinner to them. You give them the cup of tea. You ask them do they want water? All the nice things you do for them. All the horrible things that they don't like, you let someone else do. So little things like that. So you build up a rapport and you find something that you've got in common. Or if you haven't, you make it up. Find what they like and pretend you like it too. But make them like you. Make them be comfortable around them. Make it difficult for them not to want to speak to you. So, and that's much easier when you're doing it for 14 days. So my interviews would be very, very relaxed, and I would sit back in my chair. If there was if something happened, like for instance, this particular prisoner, the solicitor farted, so we're all laughing, and it's like and I had a fall guy, the person I was interviewing with. Lovely fella, but would say some stupid things. So have a good laugh at him, and everybody was just. It was a very serious thing I'm interviewing him for. So you have to be mindful of that. So you have to be conscious that you're on tape and everything, but it doesn't mean that you can't try and in the right moments make it a bit more lighthearted, make it feel less of a horrible place for him to be. He's been arrested for terrorism, potentially could go to prison for the rest of his life. But in the time he's with me, I want him to be relaxed. I want him to feel comfortable, not enjoy it. That's too far, but as much as you can. And where I said earlier on about where you don't always get them out. So there might be a day where we'd just leave them in the cell and we'd be going off doing other things. And his solicitor said to me, he said, do you know what? He said, that my client said to me, on the days where you don't get him out, he misses you. he misses me. You know? So that's justification for what I'm doing. I mean, it sounds very sneaky, doesn't it? But you're doing it for a reason. So, but then we come to what we call the challenge phase. So when you're interviewing someone, what you shouldn't be doing is continually challenging them, continually trying to point out where it looks like they're lying, trying to pin them down on evidence that points to their guilt. Everything should be a bit more open and relaxed, and getting them to try and talk to you, because what you want is ideally what you want is them to talk to you. But then you come to the challenge phase, and that's where it changes. So then I've got my game face on. Then rather than me sitting back in my chair, I'm sitting forward in my chair, and I'm then invading your space. So you would be invading somebody's personal space. You're right in there. Now my smile's gone. I'm a naturally smiley person. I smile a lot. My smile's gone. I've now got a serious face on. My tone has changed. So I'm no longer your friend. Now I'm deep. I'm talking much slower. I'm really emphasizing the words where you are wrong, you are guilty, and I'm pointing, and I'm in, and I've suddenly changed from the person that they like to be around to, wow, suddenly it's like if your favorite teacher tells you off, you're going to take it a lot harder than if it's the teacher you don't like. And it's all that psychology. It's about making them feel suddenly you're snapping them. You're not, and this comes over. This is very quick. So you're snapping them out of their comfortable place to the place they've dreaded. They've been arrested. They don't like it here, and I really don't like it now, because the only person that's been nice to me is suddenly being really horrible to me. And psychologically, it's very different. You're taking the feet from under their ground, taking the feet from underneath them, and you're putting them in a place that and suddenly, right? Oh, I don't enjoy this anymore. I don't like this, and I'm now also what I'm doing. All the bits of evidence that I've put to you, but in a more relaxed way, I'm suddenly bringing them to you, and not just here and there. I'm bringing them all together. So everything that I say makes you guilty, I'm bringing it, and I'm putting it in a way that you don't like me putting it to you. I'm bringing it all together, and then I'm doing things like I'm making you think about your future, right? So this particular one, I think he had some health issues, and just to summarize some of the things that they were planning. So they were going to go into derail Heathrow Express, where one was coming onto another so that they would collide. Build a dirty bomb using the elements from smoke alarms. like buying thousands of them, Americium, putting them in a lorry, setting a lorry on fire, and causing a dirty bomb, and to the point where they had calculated the number of deaths it would cause, cancer cases caused, defects in births. These are the sorts of things they were trying to work out. Put a bomb in an underground station in North Greenwich, which is under the Thames, to flood the underground system. Hire it might be anyway. Get a tanker. It might be steel and oil tank, a petrol tanker, and drive it into a building and blow it up. Get gas canisters that you would use for a barbecue, put them in hearses, and drive them under a building and explode them to collapse the building. No, limos. Sorry, not hearse, limos. And because they had this document. There was an amazing document that they put together, and they titled it the Gas Limos Project, based on this. And the one I was interviewing, I do interviewing two from this gang, but this one had applications to for HGV license. So the likelihood is, of those that we'd arrested, he would be the one that would drive a petrol tanker into a building and explode it. And he had the health issue. So and there was a couple of other bits. So you're just likely to think, well, you're probably gonna you were probably gonna kill yourself by driving a lorry into this thing. So then it's kind of like, so bringing it back to the interview, you prepared to die for this lot. Are you prepared for what's going to happen? You're going to go to prison for possibly the rest of your life. You're going to be an old man by the time you come out of prison. So putting that on them, thinking about prison, putting it onto them about their family. How do your family feel about this? They're going to be ashamed of you for what they're going to hear about what you've done. The victims, you were going to, you don't care who your victims are. You're doing this as an Islamic cause. You're just as likely to kill people of a Muslim faith. You don't care. Like, just bringing all the guilt on them, and he broke down in tears in front of me. Like, he was a gibbering wreck, and I couldn't get him to talk, but what I could get him to do was what we would do. The first thing you do when you interview a terrorist is you do what's called an emergency interview, where you say to them, do you know the location of any firearm, explosive or chemical? Point being that it's important that if there is anything like that we get a hold of it for the safety of police officers that are searching, the public, etc. As always, they'd say no. And but I would always revisit it periodically, because it's really important. You never know. You're 99.9% certain they're going to say nothing, but you never know. And after I'd broken him, I revisited the question, and do you know a location of any firearms, chemical or explosive? And he looked at his solicitor and he looked at me, and I could just tell that he wanted to say something. I said, you want to speak to me? I said, right, I'm going to leave the room. You have a word with your solicitor, and when I come back, I want you to talk to me. And we come outside, and my colleague and I like almost high-fiving each other, because like, he's going to talk. He's going to tell us something that's going to be it's going to be amazing. We're going to find something. We're going to be the heroes. And come back into the room. He looks at me, still looks broken, looks at his solicitor. I said, right, do you know the location of any firearm, explosive or chemical? He just looked at me and he said, no. I'd broken him to the point where I think he genuinely didn't, but he just felt he couldn't not answer me. He just felt like I'd broken him to the point, and it was such a disappointment, a deflating moment. I thought, oh, he's going to tell it. Oh yeah, we know this. I'm going to tell you, and you're going to tell your colleagues, and everyone's going to go, wow, look how good they are. And I went from there to, but then later on, when I thought about it and I reflected on it, it was like, well, yes, it was disappointing, but it was justification for everything that I'd done, all the techniques I've built up over the years, that a terrorist felt he had to speak to me, even though they never speak to you, even just because he wanted to say to me that he didn't. That's all he wanted to do. He just wanted to tell me he didn't. I'd revisited it, I'd broken him. He just wanted to tell me, no, I don't. And so it was disappointing, but it was justification for that technique that I'd built up over the years, and had worked on other people, obviously for lesser crimes.
You did good. See, when I read that in the book,
it kind of, because I thought, oh, no, Steve, he's always happy and smiley. I've liked him when I've seen him before. And then when you said that, I was like, oh, I don't like him anymore. I'm not sure about this. I could just see your face. I'm like, oh, I don't like that. So that had an impact on me. Never mind him.
We had a run, young lady, and I had an interaction with this young lady the week prior. And I was actually on another run when I heard her name come out. And apparently she had barricaded herself in her mobile trailer with her newborn at the time. So by the time I was finished with the run that I was on and I got down there, other officers was already there and they had the trailer surrounded and they were trying to get her to come out and she wouldn't come out. So when I got there, I get out of my car and I just walked up to the door and I knocked on her door, and I still remember I believe her name was Natasha or something like that. And I say, Natasha, open the door, girl. And she says, Officer McNeil? And I said, yeah, open the damn door. She opens the door and everybody's looking at me like, really? But because I had taken the time to build that rapport with her the week before, she remembered me and it was no issue. I didn't go there beating my chest or anything. And, I just treated her like, any other person. And she respected that and she reciprocated and, and we had a good rapport. And she just opened the door and we did what we had to do. But that was just one of the things as a negotiator that you learn, you learn how to just have conversations with people and talk to people. And that's something that a lot of officers need to learn, because for a lot of guys, especially the younger guys, when you put the uniform on, you feel powerful and it can go to your head. It could be an ego trip for a lot of people if you let it. And a lot of guys, or I shouldn't say a lot of guys, but some guys, they let that power go to their head and they think they can talk to people any kind of way. And now don't get me wrong, there are people that you do have to talk to a certain way in order to get your point across. But most of the people that you talk to, I'll always put it like with my kids. I never once had to spank my kids. When I said, hey, they knew that was it.
That's all you need, isn't it? Tone.
Yeah. And law enforcement's the same way. You get back what you give out. And if you come in there with this macho, do what I say or else, you're going to have a long day, as I said earlier. And it's not always the case where, most people are just cooperative. As a matter of fact, most people aren't. But you have to learn how to go with the situation and recognize what you're facing and what you're dealing with and how to handle that situation verbally, because that verbally can save you a lot of aggravation. I mean, over my year, I had to fight with a lot of people, but there was a lot of fights that were avoided simply because of the way I spoke to people.
Yeah, it's just respect, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Everything I've done since I've left is about sharing knowledge around murder.
On the table, and the technician is starting her process, and we're just small talk. And right in the middle, she says, "Uh-oh," and I'm like, "Uh-oh, what?"
I literally would go arresting people that have shot someone, and all I would have on me is a pen.
I think it's more than just a difference in the criminals. I think it's a difference in our societies.